Welcome to the Forging Honor podcast. I'm Jonathan George.
And I'm Benjamin Jones. Here at The Forge, we explore what it means to live as Christian men. Along the way, we'll be doing weekly challenges to build character through action. We are by no means experts, just two young Christian men trying to make sense of a wild world.
That's right. We're doing our best to learn and hope you'll join us on the journey. And if you want to get directly involved, go to forginghonor.com to find information on how to join our community.
This is episode 9, Faithful in the Unrighteous Wealth.
All right, well, we can jump right into this conversation. So this week we have an exciting guest. We have Elias Vedders on the show. Elias, go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit here.
Hi, I'm Elias Vedders. I've known JJ we learned that we're coming up soon to the point where we've known each other longer than we haven't known each other.
A mighty marker indeed.
Yeah, that's going to be a weird point in our relationship. And then I met Banjo in college through JJ. And I'm super excited to be here. Somebody thought that I would have fun things to say about this.
Well, I'm excited because the topics, not only for this episode, but also for next episode, are topics that Elias has gotten me thinking about more than most folks do. Introduced the book we're actually going to be looking at today a little bit. So in my mind, at least in the worlds that I'm in, he's more of an expert on these topics than I am. Now, Elias would say I'm not an expert, blah, blah, blah. Well, you might say, I don't know. Who knows? What would you say, Elias? Are you an expert?
I'm not an expert. I just have happened to read a lot of books that happen to be about this topic.
Fair
I
enough.
didn't realize that I had read so many books on these topics until you had brought up doing this.
So Elias, what is how would you phrase the topic? Like what would you name this topic? And then how did you get so interested in it? Where did all the reading come from?
Back up, Banjo. We should introduce what we're doing here before we even
I have so many questions.
He has questions. Okay.
I have questions.
I jumped ahead of ourselves. We had an introduction and it's fun. Anyway, we need to get to the challenge wrap up so we can kind of get to what we're talking about. The challenges, again, last for 10 days, Monday through Friday for 2 weeks. Pretty straightforward. Simple daily tasks to grow us as men. This previous challenge had to do with looking at the spaces around us, going through our houses, room by room, maybe our car, maybe considering the outdoor spaces that we have domain over, and considering kind of where we want them to be, visualizing what we want them to be like. I don't know. This one was a little bit of meditation, a little bit of journaling. I found the numbers in Discord, so all y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but I had 6 days, Banjo's 6 days, and Elias 4. Is that accurate?
I think that's accurate. I might have had one more day that I missed putting in the marker, but I'll live with 6. This one was the hardest one for me to do, I think.
Right. So circling back around to your question there, Banjo, ask that to Elias again, because it is kind of an odd, like, this is not a topic I think we as men think about, like, oh, my room is my room. And right. I think this is something that at least I don't think about very much. I know Elias thinks about it a lot more.
Yeah. So to regroup then, Elias, what is this topic that we're dealing with, and how did you get so interested in it?
Yeah, so it's a little bit. JJ posed it as like a dual topic of both the environments that we live in, and then also consumerism and being conscious consumers. I studied economics in college, and consumerism was a big part of that, just because we wanted to do economics in a Christian way, and I think it's a pretty universal Christian concept that stuff isn't the end all be all. And then as for the environment stuff, I mean, for a long time I was listening to a lot of audiobooks through the library. And I got like 4 books into the Game of Thrones series, and I hated it. such a bad series that I was like, well, I'll just read whatever I can find next that is available that looks interesting, because I'm so bored reading Game of Thrones. And I happened to read The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo, and I was absolutely blown away. It is one of my favorite books. I raid McKay's for copies of these because they're like $1. They're in the self-help section at McKay's. And I give them away as wedding gifts and graduation gifts to pretty much anyone who invites me to these things. I actually just recently ran out, so maybe this afternoon I'll be running to
Where's
McKay's
my
again.
copy? I still don't have a copy. You might have started doing this after I got married, but still.
I might have. It took me a while to realize how cheap they were at McKay's, because they are dirt cheap.
So it's The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. That's it? Okay.
Yeah. It's a really fun, really good little book. It's really cute too. Like, the cover is just a nice watercolor image. But it was a really good book. And I originally started at the time I was living in my parents' house over break, and I didn't have much space. I was actually living in the laundry room at the time. So I didn't have much space to do this with.
Here,
But I still wanted to do it. And I ended up this first time doing Marie Kondo's method. I threw out 4 garbage bags worth of my stuff from just the one room that I occupied in my parents' house.
And those 4 garbage bags were not your parents' laundry, because it was the laundry room.
No. This is I got rid of 2 bags of clothes, which I think is something that's really interesting for us men. Is, we always think, oh well, we don't have that many clothes. Oh, we don't have that much stuff. I mean, you look at a bachelor pad and it's super bare. But then when you actually go through and start using Marie Kondo's method, you realize that you have 2 garbage bags full of clothes that you can get rid of, that you haven't worn, or that don't fit you, or that you used to like but you don't like anymore, or it's a hand-me-down. You used to think, oh, maybe I'll wear this, but you never really wanted to wear it. So it's a really fascinating thing to do it for the first time and realize how much stuff I have accumulated that I didn't realize that I had accumulated. Medicine cabinets are also just a great place to look,
Right. So Sorry, I just wanted to ask, I know that, having read Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, I know Marie Kondo is not just about get rid of all your stuff, right? She's not a minimalist. So I'd be curious to hear kind of your perspective on that. Like, Marie Kondo does encourage getting rid of the things you don't need, but what sets her apart from, say, the minimalist movement?
I would say that the line is incredibly blurry, and that is also just a function of her environment that she was living in. So she's Japanese. She lived in Tokyo, and that's primarily where she got her start, is Japanese women in Tokyo who needed to clean up their houses because their space in Tokyo is at a ridiculously high premium. And so storage is really expensive, and cluttered houses and rooms became a very common thing. And so in Japan, in Tokyo, it is very common for Marie Kondo to encourage minimalism in those contexts. There's just not a lot of room to expand. And so by necessity, you have to live a minimalist life. Now, I think that, some of those recommendations come through, and I think it's easy to read minimalism into Marie Kondo. But at the end of the day, her metrics is, does it bring you joy? And if it brings you joy, you should keep it. And so when you have space, you have more things that you can use, you don't have to get rid of everything. You shouldn't get rid of stuff for the sake of getting rid of it. You should get rid of it because it doesn't bring you joy.
So, Elias, with the whole bring you joy, I've heard this. I haven't read the book, but I've heard that phrase before. And minimalism has always been very attractive to me, even though I'm not a minimalist by any stretch of the imagination.
No, not at all.
No,
Dear listener.
but but I'm fascinated. As I'm also fascinated by hoarders, which I want to get to later. But you're talking about the method of Marie Kondo. Could you give a brief summary on what that method is for those of us who don't know?
Absolutely. And it starts actually with the challenge that we just did. So before you do anything else, Marie Kondo encourages people to visualize what their life looks like clutter-free. And so that's kind of what I did these past 2 weeks. I went room by room in my house. So each day that I did do my honor journal, which was not very many, I picked a room of the house that I wanted to think about. And I thought, when I'm living my ideal life, when I'm living my wildest fantasy life, what is this room in my house used for? So I think the living room was probably the one that I nailed the most when it came to my journals. Like, I want this to be a place that has a TV that I can use, but the TV is not necessarily the focus point, but it's a place that's comfortable for people to come in, spend time, and chat. And actually, I ended up completely reorganizing the living room because I had inspiration now, because I had put this into context of what I wanted it to be. But obviously, we don't have time to go through her whole method because she wrote a whole book about it. Essentially,
Sure.
The next step is to begin discarding stuff. And she has several different ways to, what's the word I'm looking for? Keep wanting to say methodicalize, but that's not an actual word.
Could be. Just got to say it loudly and
Methodize?
Methodize. She has several different methods to help you along your way. And she thinks that they're good to do things in a certain order, in a certain way, because you'll get a better result. And essentially, she has an order in which you should start discarding items by category and not by place. So she very much encourages you to do everything of a specific kind at one time. So that way you don't get to another room and you're like, oh, I have all these other pens. Did I throw enough pens away before? Do I need more pens still? So have all of your pens, all of your knickknacks. She calls pens and other similar office supplies komono, or little things in Japanese. And then there's an order you go through your stuff. So the categories begins with clothes and ends with memorabilia. You start with clothes because those are the easiest for you to look at and immediately say, this sparks joy, this does not spark joy. And then it becomes increasing in difficulty to determine whether it sparks joy until you get to memorabilia. Because very clearly memorabilia is going to be that item that requires the most thought. Does this spark joy? Does this provide utility for me? Or does it not? And the hope is that as you've worked through this entire list, you have developed the sense of what sparks joy. And so when you get to memorabilia, you're not immediately clouded by, oh, these are sentimental moments from my past. I need to keep every single item. You've developed that intuition of, okay, this sparks joy. No, this doesn't spark joy, and allows you to tackle those more difficult things. And then afterwards, she has a special way of folding clothes, which I have adopted wholesale in my life. And I think Lila Grace has adopted for the two of you, JJ.
Yes, my wife. So,
she's very proud of your shirt drawer.
The folding in our house got much better after we got married.
So I'm curious. So the idea is, with the memorabilia, right? You've reached a point where you're able to identify the feelings of joy within yourself, so that even with these prized possessions that you have, you're still able to tell the difference between one that is just like a bag of memories and one that is like an explosion of euphoria, for lack of a better word. Like, does she say more about that idea?
Well, I think I appreciate that she leaves it vague, because I think that having a specific criteria that you meet for throwing memorabilia away is a little difficult. I feel like memorabilia becomes very subjective, what's worth keeping. And so she has guidelines for the rest of it. Like, you should only have so many books, or you should only have so many different personal care items like Q-tips and the like. But when it comes to memorabilia, she tends to be a little bit vague. And I think that's because different things mean different things to other people, which is why it's at the end. You've built up the intuition at this point. You know it sparks joy, and what level is valuable to keep. You know, some people probably have kept a lot more memorabilia than I have. I don't get a lot out of memorabilia. I don't take as many pictures as I should. And so, I was able to get rid of a lot more memorabilia than my wife was when we did this the last time. She held on to a lot more things, and that's not a bad thing. It's just she receives more joy from those items than I do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting concept. So one of the things that I did with this challenge is I spent time. The thing that I always think about with in terms of space, and especially because I knew we were going to talk about Marie Kondo, who I'm fascinated by. One of the things that I'm interested in is clutter, and all of the things that seem to overwhelm the physical space, just in the sheer mess of it, right? And my mom, when we were growing up, was very, very organized, and she was always trying to figure out a new way, to organize the space. So we must have been through like 83, bajillion different ways of organizing a space that worked to varying degrees of success. But I think as a result of that, maybe not as a result, but a byproduct, I've always been really fascinated by hoarders who have, no organizational sense or dividing line between what's a piece of trash and what's a treasure, right? So I started watching the show actually this week as part of the challenge. I wanted to look through and see like what are the lives of hoarders like really. So I watched the show. It was on Netflix, and one of the things that really struck me is we're talking about these items that spark joy for people. One of the things that stood out is that hoarders have lost the ability to tell the difference. Every item sparks joy for them. There was one woman on the show who she couldn't throw anything away because she had to touch everything. She had to see everything, and every time she touched it and she saw it, she was like, "Oh, but this is really precious. This is really important."
Like, in what way? Like, did she associate it with a memory or something, or was it just because that was how she explored the world? Like,
sometimes. So I also there's actually a revisionist history podcast episode about this. Dragon Psychology 101, I think is the name of the episode. And in that episode, Malcolm Gladwell explains that for some hoarders, some of the time it's if you have a particular item. You can't throw it away because there are certain memories that are attached to that day. And if you throw it away, it's like losing that memory. It's like losing that connection to your past. And so you kind of just collect this stack of things that don't have any actual meaning, but you can't throw it away because it's your memories, right?
So, like, for example, on the one level, I have the movie tickets from my first date with my wife, or it wasn't our first. No, that our first like official date as a dating couple was a movie. So that was I have those movie tickets, but it'd be the same thing. Like, maybe I saved a burger wrapper from a later date because I was afraid to forget that date.
Or it would be like any time that you had lunch with your wife, you had to save everything from that date. Like, you couldn't throw anything away.
Couldn't get rid of the receipt. Couldn't get rid of the
and so it just
wrapping for the food. Yeah.
So it just piles up in the house, right? It's not always like that. For some people, it's they just can't get rid of anything, right? It's literally like Marie Kondo. Everything sparks joy, and so they have to hold on to that stuff, which is just really sad. But also, very human to watch. I think looking at it, that particular struggle and addiction, I think, is a really striking visual representation of the human condition. We seek after these idols that pile up in our home, and then we become like them. And so I think there's a lot of value in Marie Kondo's like, hey, make sure that your stuff isn't ruling you. Make sure that you have control over the things that are in your life. But do you have any idea, Elias, what she might, could Marie Kondo go into a hoarder's house and reorganize, or is that just not her scene? Is that just a different combat ring?
It's a great question. I think Marie Kondo's definition of hoarders, you have a very low threshold for entry into that category. She, in her book, even just says storage experts are hoarders. The whole principle of out of sight, out of mind does not coexist within her philosophy. So anyone, who has a bunch of stuff stored away can fall into that hoarder camp as far as Marie Kondo is concerned. Storage should not be our priority. It should be about having the level of stuff that allows us to easily access and remember those things that we have.
If I recall, though, she's not opposed 100% to storage. For example, if it's a seasonal item that only comes out at one particular holiday.
Yes.
But she does require that those items are curated well, right? They're not, you don't just have every Christmas item hidden away somewhere, but you do go through those as well. And when the season is upon you, you only have the items that spark joy.
Right. And I think that gets to the idea of being selective, gets to one of those ideas that makes Marie Kondo very oddly Christian. So she's not a Christian. She comes from Japan. She's coming from a Shinto Buddhist background. And so she sees souls in everything that you have. Everything that you have matters. Everything it has a soul. And so when you aren't utilizing an item, when you aren't using an item for what it was intended for and receiving joy from that, you are not allowing that item to fulfill its purpose. And you are not respecting that item well. And so that idea of items having souls is obviously not very Christian, but it just struck me, and this is kind of where that title comes from for the episode. We're supposed to be faithful in the small things. We are supposed to have dominion over God's creation. And when we let stuff pile up that we forget about, when we have shirts tucked away in the back of our drawer that we never see and we never use, we are not utilizing those items that God gave us well. We are not stewarding the things that God gave us well. And I think that that's something that we don't tend to think about. But if we're not faithful in the small things, we can't be faithful in the big things. And so I think it's really important for us to very seriously consider how we're using the goods that we have. Are we treating them well? Are we using them for, number one, the purposes that they were intended? And number two, are we using them and is it bringing joy or utility to us in some way? And if it's not, there's a good chance that it's just getting in the way of what you want to do, whether that is, you want to have space with which to do journaling or devotions or reading, or it's getting in the way of you spending time on your hobbies or with your wife because you're just spending all of your time cleaning up this clutter that you don't really use and you don't particularly enjoy, but you haven't gotten rid of.
That's a good point. JJ, how did you feel about, or how did you experience this challenge this week? Was it easy for you? Was it difficult for you? Sounds like you and Elias have talked about this stuff before. Was it kind of natural for you to get into the swing of things?
Yes and no. Let's see. I was first introduced to Marie Kondo, and Elias let me borrow a copy of his. this would have been very, very new into my marriage. So my wife and I went through and did the Marie Kondo method on a lot of our stuff at our little apartment at the time. So there wasn't a ton in there, and we actually got rid of a surprising amount of stuff. One thing I know Elias does that I have not done is he has revisited this multiple times, right? So it's not something that you're one and done, and then you can forget about it. You're gonna accumulate more stuff eventually, unless you're just the most rigorous person on that front. And so kind of getting back into it, it was, what do I want for this space? And one of the things I kind of realized was, I have most of the spaces in my house right now anyway. Like in the future, I want to change stuff about my home, but like right now, my spaces are what I want them to be. That said, they are often filled with clutter and paraphernalia and knickknacks and things that I don't need. And so that was kind of what does my life look like where my mind is not clouded by these items? And kind of to Elias's point, what does that allow me to do if I'm not every morning I got to straighten up my desk so I can work? What if my desk was just already clean because it didn't have all of this paraphernalia on it that I have on here? And so that was helpful for me. Doing the visualizing to the extent that Elias did, I think that's never been something that wasn't something I was very good at in this particular instance. So it was a challenge in the sense of I had to really work at it. One thing I kind of want to way earlier in the conversation, and then I want to get back to what Elias was saying about kind of the scriptural and the implications for us as Christians. But one thing on the things like mementos or anything that brings us memories, just as an aside, a solution that I can't remember if Marie Kondo mentions this in her book, but one thing my wife and I have been making an effort to do is we got rid of a lot of mementos and things we didn't need, but we set aside ones that we could display. So if it could go on a wall, say in a picture frame, if it was a picture, or maybe it's things like I mentioned, those movie tickets, could it go on a little, make a pretty collage out of it? I don't know. Things that could fall into that category. Or one thing that I've really struggled getting rid of, I have these t-shirts from high school, like racing t-shirts, these t-shirts from plays I was in, just things like that really, I associate a lot of memories with those things. And those are pretty much the only things I have from those memories. So we set those aside, and I'm going to get those. You can buy little t-shirt boxes and show like the images on there. And then they look like pictures, but it's a t-shirt in there. Anyway, like you'll see those in coffee shops and stuff. So that's one thing I want to invest in, is be able to actually display those instead of them sitting in a box, right? Same thing for my college paraphernalia, my racing gear and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Marie and we've got just piles of memorabilia right now. We've got down to the memorabilia that we want. It's just in random boxes and random piles in our bookshelf in our office. And
Right.
so we need to start scrapbooking or something. We need to get these in a way that it's easy to go through them and to enjoy.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, I don't know when that's going to happen.
Right. Yeah. Finding the time for this is its own challenge. So I think there are solutions if you're thinking, man, I never look at this thing, but I don't want to get rid of it. Well, how can you display it in your home would be part of my question. What utility does memorabilia have? Well, it has no utility if it's hidden away. It has utility when you take it out and look at it. So kind of on that note, getting to the scriptural side of things, one thing I've thought about a little bit. So the title of this episode being "Faithful in the Unrighteous Wealth." So I'm going to read the verse that's from. That was Luke 16:11. Yeah, thank you. So Elias brought this verse and wanted to discuss it. So Luke 16:11. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches?
Yeah, just
or
to
who
add,
will entrust to you the true riches? I misread that, but so I think that's important. But also, I was thinking of parable of the talents. On the idea of hiding things away versus using those things. right? The one servant that hides his talent that his master gives him, it's taken away from him. The servants that go and utilize those talents they have are multiplied and grown, right? So that, I think in some ways that's maybe a bit of a stretch, but it's a bit of an application I was thinking about on this side as well. So Elias, what was that? You wanted to comment on Luke 16?
Oh, I just wanted to say, give a little context that this verse is coming right after the verse of being, if you're faithful in the small things, you will be faithful in a lot, and if you are unfaithful in the small things, you will be unfaithful in much. And so that's where the idea of faithful in the unrighteous wealth. So when you're faithful with the things of this world that in the end don't matter, then you can be trusted with the things of true importance. So don't want to confuse anybody and make people think that we're here advocating for unrighteous things.
and to stretch it even farther, just to see the bigger picture, the verses that we're looking at in particular are coming right after the parable of the dishonest manager, right? The man who has this huge debt against his master, and the master forgives him the huge debt, and then the man turns around and demands the much smaller debt from the servant under him. And the point of the parable, right, is, if we have been given this great love from God, if we've seen this great wealth of riches of God's love and grace in the death and resurrection of Christ, how much more then should we in turn love our neighbor, love those around us? And so there's a faith-based element to this that I think is really important to bear in mind. But then right after that, we have the law and the kingdom of God, laws about divorce and remarriage, and then the very bizarre, and I have no idea how to interpret, scene with the rich man and Lazarus. If you guys dare to jump into those waters, you're braver than I. But the point, I think, is like, this isn't just a passage about physical things, right? This is very much a passage about spiritual things. But I think there is implications of, if we're seeking to love one another well, with this love that has been given to us, then that's going to apply to every element of our life, right? Elias, you and I think share a little love of things Japan, particularly. I've been interested lately in the samurai. I think I mentioned it on here on the show, but I was reading the samurai handbook, the Hagakure, which is fascinating. Elias, have you ever read that?
I haven't. I have another one called The Sword in the Mind. That's not as broad as that one, but I've read Bushido stuff.
Okay. Yeah. So in the Hagakure, it's essentially like it's written at the last days of the samurai, and by an old samurai, basically telling everyone this is what the samurai were like. And one of the big things that he points out is that everything that you do as a samurai reflects on your code, on your way of life. And so even the smallest of things demonstrate to the enemy whether or not you've been faithful, and whether or not you're living true to your code. So one example he gives in the book is he says, do not go into battle unshaven, for if the enemy finds you fallen dead with stubble on your face, they will know that you have been unresolved in this thing, and you will die with shame. Which is pretty extreme. Like, it's this tiny thing. You didn't shave in the morning. But for the samurai, that was like, hey, he failed in his duty here. And I think Christianity has much more grace than that, right? Like, we don't need to freak out if we die and go to heaven, and St. Peter is like, hey, you've got a little bit something on your chin there, bud.
Or in my case, a lot bit.
Or a lot bit, right? That's not the issue here. But what is the issue is the samurai, if they did nothing else well, they were masters at living a life fully dedicated to what they believed, right? There's no part of a samurai's life that you can look at and say, well, he was inconsistent in this way, right? to the point that
At least the ideal samurai. I mean, there were
right. Yes, good
right.
point.
There were plenty of samurai that didn't live to those standards, but there were clear standards to say they didn't live to those standards.
Exactly right. To the point that one of my favorite thing about the samurai so far in my reading has been this idea of the final moment of resolve. So samurai were supposed to meditate upon the moment of their death for like an hour every day. Just think about how you're going to die, and when you die,
Our
how
next challenge.
Not yet. No. But the idea was that you have to be ready for this moment of death, so that whatever happens, you can have one final moment of resolve. And it was insane. The famous example that they give was one samurai was attacked by he was betrayed by two of his friends, and they came upon him. They came behind him, and they went to stab him and cut off his head. So they chopped off his head. And before his head had hit the ground, the dying samurai pulled out his sword and killed his attackers. And then, his head lies there on the ground. So they cut his head off, and before his head hits the ground, he kills them both. Something like that. And it was the kind of thing where this was
that
like
possible? How do you?
I don't know, but this guy
That's the story. That's the
story, and they said he had witnesses. So I'm choosing to believe that it actually happened, because that's amazing. But I think one of the things with this challenge that I thought was important to recognize was, if we have been loved in this way, if we have been forgiven this great debt as the servant has in this parable, what does that look like in every element of our life? Because it's not that we're trying to, we don't have to keep our room clean in order to get into heaven, right? But I think it is true that since we have been saved, since we have been loved, we should have a certain respect for the world around us, a certain love for the world around us, in which we are willing to demonstrate the love that has been given to us, and to pour that out, like an overflowing cup onto other people, so that there's no area of your life that someone can look at and go, well, that hasn't been touched by, the grace of God. I don't know. Does that make sense? What do you guys think?
It's a long stream of thought. So just kind of making sure I understand. Coming from this idea of being responsible with little, so you can be responsible or faithful with much, that requires a basis somewhat like the samurai that dwell every day of their lives on this particular moment. In their case, they're dwelling on that final moment, death. And for us, it's kind of poetic. We should be dwelling every day on the fact that we have life, right? And so we should live our lives in such a way. And in doing so, that gets back around to we can then grow in our ability to be faithful with that great thing.
Right. And life by Christ's death and resurrection, right? Like, it's not just, we have, we're alive now. It's, we have eternal life through the death and resurrection of the God-man. And I think that's, if we recognize the truth of that, then that has a powerful implication for how we live our life. I think the question
is, how does that help me clean my room?
Well, for me, reading this passage, and Elias, I don't know if you want to jump in on this, but the thing that I think is, well, is it who am I loving if my room is untidy? Who am I loving if I'm all my clothes are on the floor and the dishes are undone and I'm not utilizing the space well? It's me. I'm the center of attention there. I think Elias had a great point by saying, the way that he visualized his living room space was to make it hospitable, right? To make it so that he can have other people over. And I think, like, for me, that was one of the biggest things that I came away with was I want to have my house be in a state where, no matter what day of the week it is, if somebody needs to come over, somebody wants to come over, I can feel comfortable saying, hey, yeah, come on over. There's plenty of space. There's food in the fridge. If you need to use the couch for a bed, great, but to feel like I can do that at a moment's notice, I think, is that element of being ready and willing to serve and love somebody else because I have been loved. But also, it's like, I'm living with my wife. It's not very loving if I don't do my turn with the dishes once a week, that kind of a thing. Elias, what do you agree, disagree? Does this match up with what you're thinking?
Yeah, I do agree a lot, and I think it also has to do with a couple of other things as well. You got that Kuyperian idea of everything is Christ. Christ has claimed dominion over everything, and we tend to think about that in terms of politics and government and the church, but it also applies to your dresser drawer. It applies to the shirt that's in the very back corner that you haven't worn for 2 months. Like, that's Christ as well, and everything should be redeemed. And if you're not taking care of your stuff, you're not redeeming it, you're not fully doing the work of bringing about the kingdom of God. Um, and I think a little bit, and it's good. We've been gotten lost in the sort of spiritual, well, we should do it because God says we should do it sort of
Right.
idea, which is true 100%. But also, there's practical benefits to this as well. If Marie Kondo says that tidying up should not be a daily occurrence. It should not be something that you do every day. It should be something that you do once a year. It should be a big event. But if you do her method right, you don't spend every day doing it. So if you're not spending every day tidying up, what are you able to do instead? If your desk is clear and you don't have to think about everything that's on it, all of the papers that you haven't gotten around to, the books that you've just set down on there and haven't gotten around to reading, all of those distractions are gone. What could you do with that mental space as well? So I want to reiterate that it's not just for some lofty ideals. These ideas have practical purpose, and all things considered are pretty easy to implement. And something that I really enjoy about Marie Kondo is this a once a year thing. I sometimes find that it's a lot easier to get stuff done that I know I should get done if there's a whole day around it. I find that, like, if I say, okay, Saturday, the thing is going to be, we're going to get work done outside. We're going to do the gardening. We're going to do the lawn. If I make a big deal out of it, it becomes a lot easier to get done because I don't put something else in that space mentally. I've been planning on this ahead of time. And so Marie Kondo encourages that sort of, this is an event, this is a special time. So with your wife or, your roommates that you're living with, make it a big deal. Get pizza at the end of it as a reward. And because it's such an intensive process, you really have to commit a whole day to it, which I think really, makes it easier to get done. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense, where you kind of have you set up these themes in your lives or in your life, and you work through it, and you're living out the spiritual stuff we're talking about. You live out the calling that we are called to. And as with anything that the Lord commands, there's a reason he commands it, right? He doesn't just command that we should walk around feeling pious in our hearts. Everything he commands has a practical reason on this earth. Like, we are human and he designed us that way. And so we should seek to live out everything we do in that practical sense. So I really like what you're saying there.
Yeah. And Banjo, I remember you saying, talking about when we were discussing the idea for this last challenge, the idea of being in the traces. And, like, I really feel like Marie Kondo is a great way, because you can get stuck in bad traces, bad habits and routines. And this is a great way to just refresh that whole playing field. You reorganize the living room, it's a whole new space, and you're kind of excited about it again, and you want to take care of it because you're like, oh, this is new and fun. Or your desk is finally clear of all the papers. You now are kind of freed from that mental burden and can put yourself on the right tracks and start building those, helpful habits, those helpful ruts.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, and that idea from the Call of the Wild of just doing that good and blessed labor. You can only do it if the traces are clean. You can only work if your equipment is clean. And I don't know if you guys ever do this, but I collect all of when I'm working on writing projects. Anytime I have an idea, I write it down on like whatever napkin or loose piece of paper I have handy at the moment, and then I just pile them up on these different places around my house so that I'm like always able to write on them. But then my wife points out that they just sit there, and I think I'm getting inspired. I think I'm having a great idea, but I'm just a hoarder. I'm a hoarder of my own ideas, which is maybe the most narcissistic thing I could say, I think, out loud. But now with her help, I have taken them, I have thrown them away, and I have my typewriter's out, and I've got a clean slate, a clean bill of health.
Well, did you keep some of them at least? The ones that you're like, this is something worthwhile.
Yeah, there's a few. There's a few. Most of them I've already transferred onto my computer, which is a great place to keep out the clutter. But there's still 4 or 5 left that I said, no, I got to write this down. Now I just actually have to do it. That's the main thing.
Yeah, and that's something that I didn't talk about in the Marie Kondo method is she wants you to bring everything out and go through it and look at it and hold it individually, really like give it the time of day, give it the respect that it deserves so that you can accurately judge if it sparks joy. I have found clothes that I love that I forgot that I owned. And in that same way, I can absolutely imagine how you go through those story ideas one by one. You're like, I forgot about this one. This is something that I need to get on ASAP because this is a really good idea. But I'd forgotten about it because it had just sat in these piles around my house and I didn't remember about it. I got distracted by other things.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up this portion of our conversation. We're going to jump into the next challenge or talk about the next challenge, and then we'll be able to continue aspects of this conversation in 2 weeks. So I'm excited kind of having a 2-parter here, focusing on a couple different things.
It's big.
All right. So this next challenge, let me take a look at it here. We had to workshop this one a little bit. But again, challenges last for 10 days. Simple daily tasks to grow us as men. And this challenge, I have what I have written down here is keep track of the ads that you see, especially the ads that work, and consider whether what you purchase had to do with that ad or had to do with an ad at all. So I want to have a quick little 5-minute discussion about the why on this challenge and kind of what we're looking for out of it. And then we'll be discussing it in 2 weeks. So Elias, since we're going to be talking about consumerism, we are hoping to get some of that out of, or hoping to become more aware of that out of this. As we do this, what are your thoughts on just very broadly consumerism and kind of what we're talking about here in terms of the clutter in our lives, but how does that transition into the consumerism side of things?
Yeah, I think the transition from Marie Kondo to consumerism is pretty straightforward. Stuff is not the enemy. We're not trying to purge ourselves of stuff, but we want to make sure that the stuff that we have is stuff that, number one, actually brings us joy or some sort of utility, and number two, isn't wasting away somewhere. I don't know how common this is for you. It's not super common for me, but there's been a whole series online from different creators that I've seen about here's all the stuff that I bought when I was in a depressive mood. Here's all the stuff that I bought on this random spree. And so we're not anti-stuff, but we don't want to just accumulate stuff to accumulate stuff. We want to accumulate things that bring us joy.
So those YouTubers these creators you're following, you're saying that they're doing it purposely and that's good, or it's the opposite. They're just buying stuff because they are.
They're buying stuff because they can. And buying stuff in and of itself has become an activity for people,
Right.
which is relatively new. And so it's not necessarily about the items. It's about the process of getting the items. And I'm not going to say that's bad. There are a few things that I enjoy more than tracking a package that I've purchased on Amazon.
It is satisfying.
But you also want to make sure that that item, once it gets there, is something that you actually want. And advertising is one of those things. It's gone from being something that is to inform you of a product, to help you make an informed decision, and actually become something to manufacture demand where demand didn't exist before.
Well, and this will go to our the conversation Banjo and I had, maybe, was it 3 episodes ago now about technology and the data that is being used on that side. So I'd be interested to kind of recap that conversation in 2 weeks as well.
I think the other thing to think about, and the thing maybe that I'll be consumed with, but as we think about it, is what are these ads actually selling? JJ just got that, by the way. That took him a minute. He just got it. What are these products actually selling? It is so rarely is a ad nowadays actually just, here's a product and this is what you can have with it. It's not just here's a new set of tires and you can drive your car. It's always, here's a new set of tires and now you have freedom. You can go wherever you want on our tires. That kind of a thing. They're promising this subconscious thing. And I think it's really important to learn to be aware of those things, that we're not buying products, we're buying philosophies, we're buying psychologies. And what are those things that we are buying into, right? What are the things that work? What are the ads that work on us? And what are the subconscious things they sell that we really desire?
Well, and why do we want them? Right. That's important. And I think we'll go towards the spiritual side of that conversation of why do we want the things that we want?
But that's for next week.
Well, thanks, Elias, for coming on for this episode. I really look forward to continuing aspects of this discussion. I'm excited to talk about consumerism. I know it's something that we've been having conversations about offline for a while, and I think it'll be good to kind of recap some of those and get to a point where we can reach a good understanding.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Elias.
Absolutely, thanks for having me. It's been an absolute blast.
This has been the Forging Honor podcast. Music and production is by Elliot George. For more information about what we do or to learn how to get involved, visit our website at forginghonor.com. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to like, subscribe, and give us a rating to bring others into the Forging Honor journey.
On our website, you'll find information on how to do the challenges alongside us, as well as links to the resources we mention in the show.
And we do make a small amount from any purchases you make through our website links, so thank you in advance.
Thanks for taking the time with us today. We hope you'll take up the work alongside us and join us in the task of Forging Honor. We'll see you next time.